So after months of hype and anticipation, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands has finally released, and honestly, I'm a little bit mixed. It's by far the most unique entry we've got in the series yet, and I'm definitely excited to see where they take it in the future. A little bit of info about me: I freaking loved Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon's Keep. I think it's hands down the best DLC to ever be made for literally any game in existence, so when they announced that Wonderlands was going to be Dragon's Keep on a much larger scale, I was basically shitting my pants. But that is plenty enough rambling, so without further ado, let's get into this review of Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. So just like the pre-sequel, this game takes us way back to the past, which to be honest seems like it may become a recurring theme within the Borderlands series. It's not like it really matters like at all, but it was just something interesting that I've noticed. It's set sometime between the events of Borderlands 2 and Borderlands 3 within the fictional board game world of bunkers and badasses. It features some returning characters like Brick and Torg, as well as a few new faces like Valentine and Fred. If this is your first Borderlands game, then basically Bunkers and Badasses is Borderlands' version of D&D. This was introduced back in Borderlands 2 in the Assault on Dragon's Keep DLC, which you might remember I mentioned earlier. I was wary to say the least that it would diverge way too far from the classic Borderlands feel that we all know and love, and it would kind of turn the game into something that it shouldn't be. On pen and paper, pun intended, a tabletop RPG and a fast-paced looter shooter should not mesh well, but Gearbox did an amazing job of giving us the best that each genre has to offer, while simultaneously cutting out the monotony that every RPG contains. Considering this is Borderlands we're talking about, I think I should start this off right and talk about the weapon variety. It's amazing, with a few caveats. This time around, we have all of the same manufacturers as Borderlands 3, just with some slightly different names. For example, Jacobs is now called Black Powder and Hyperion is called Hyperius. The game also introduces some new manufacturers such as Cleave and Conjura, which go right alongside the new weapon types. So in Wonderlands, a really big change that was included this time around is the addition of a melee slot. In previous Borderlands games, you were stuck with whatever melee weapon your respective Vault Hunter spawned with, and although there were characters that could run melee builds, you could not directly upgrade your weapon in any way. But this time we have dedicated melees, and I'm really happy with how they handled it. As usual, no matter what weapon you're using, it kind of feels like a wet noodle compared to your guns, which certainly stays true to the franchise. But this time we're given several types of melee weapons to choose from, each with their own stats and perks. This ranges from swords to hammers to axes. There's quite a few to choose from, and the most exciting part to me is that this is going to open up a whole new level of variety for in-game builds that we haven't ever seen from a game in the series. I actually chose Stabomancer as my second class, and combined with Clawbringer, I was able to get some really good melee damage. We also get spells in this game which kind of act as a secondary action skill in a way. The catch to this though is that they replace grenade mods entirely, and I have to admit that considering this is a Borderlands game, that kind of upset me at first. But after playing around with a few spells for a while, I'm happy to say that they're honestly better than grenade mods simply because they feel a lot more practical. If you're asking me, the majority of grenade mods in previous games were honestly useless anyway, so I'm actually pretty pleased with this change. Just like the new melee weapons, there's a huge variety of spells to be found, ranging from meteors to elemental bolts. My favorite one I've found so far is called Sunder, and it just shoots a shockwave of fire across the entire map. Seriously, I don't know if it's bugged or not, but it just does not stop. As I said earlier, all the original manufacturers have made their return to the game, and although I think the gun catalog this time around is a little bit lackluster compared to Borderlands 3, it's still got a nice variety. You have lots of crossbow guns, but so far I've found assault rifles that shoot saws, shotguns that shoot elemental arcs, and even an SMG that fires exploding balls of healing energy. It's exactly what you would expect from a Borderlands game, and I really have no major complaints other than that there seems to be an abundance of pistols and SMGs, which gets really annoying after a while. Alongside weapons, we also get ring and necklace slots for some minor stat buffs, and there really isn't much to say about them, but I just wanted to make sure I included that. I guess they kind of serve as artifact replacements. Now I want to talk about some really minor complaints that are for the most part very subjective, so take everything I say here with a grain of salt. First is the art style, because I'm really not too impressed with many of the environments that they created for this game. There's a few good apples, but for the most part they give off a super generic fantasy vibe, and I don't think it brings anything new or interesting to the table. I will admit though that Ward 2 Shallows was a really cool area, and it reminded me a lot of the Captain Scarlet DLC from Borderlands 2. Overall, I think that they did a much better job with Assault on Dragon's Keep, and it's really a shame to see how wildly different the two are. I also really wish Gearbox would take a step back and give us another game with the heavy cell shading that Borderlands 2 has. I think that style paired with Borderlands 3 graphics would look absolutely stunning. Now as for the performance of the game, I'm not going to be able to to give a clear-cut answer on whether it's optimized well or not. For reference, I have a 2060 KO with a 5600X and 32GB of RAM, but I struggle to maintain a smooth 60 on high settings. From my knowledge, the port of Borderlands 3 on PC had issues upon launch, so I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing is happening here. But for now, I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt and see how things play out. Also, small little annoyance. For some reason, the clutter option in graphics acts kind of like anti-aliasing for text, and I'm not sure why that is, but here's a clip. Like I said earlier, that's all super subjective, and it's really just me being nitpicky. Don't take any of that to heart, but definitely do be aware that the game may not be what you're expecting. I want to discuss the Overworld now because I think it's a really cool system. Basically, the Overworld acts as a kind of hub for getting between worlds. There are fast travel stations in this game, but if you want to navigate between zones, you have to use the Overworld, and I honestly think it's the coolest thing ever. In my opinion, it's so much more engaging than running to a catch-a-ride and then driving across a map for 5 minutes to get where you need to go like you do in the previous games. On your journeys through the Overworld, you can even run into random encounters, which are just arena-based dungeons that give you a reward at the end after you clear all the enemies. I think the encounter system is great simply because it's rewarding and it adds so much content to the game. Not to mention it's entirely optional and very easily skippable. The enemies run super slow and eventually despawn, so you can literally just outrun them if you're not in the mood for a random encounter. I can definitely see it getting old and annoying in the future, but for now I think it's great and I love it. Aside from that, there's also plenty of side missions and collectibles to keep you entertained for quite a while in the Overworld. This is without a doubt my favorite feature of the game, and although thematically it probably wouldn't fit, I'd definitely like to see something similar in future titles. Honestly, I have nothing negative to say about the Overworld. Good job here, Gearbox. Aside from the Overworld, there's also one other activity that they added to the game, but I'm only going to speak briefly about it, and I'm not going to show any footage of it because it contains some pretty heavy spoilers. It's called the Chaos Chambers, and at its core it's a roguelike dungeon kind of thing. Basically, it takes those random encounters that you can stumble across in the Overworld and turns them into higher level dungeons with greater rewards. Every time you complete an arena, it gets harder, but the rewards you gain are increased, and you can buy upgrades during your runs to make yourself even stronger. I've always wanted a roguelike aspect in the Borderlands games, and the Chaos Chamber certainly delivers. And by the way, we're just gonna pretend like Arms Race doesn't exist. The character creation is seriously outstanding in this game. I never want to see another pre-made Vault Hunter in a Borderlands game again. Gearbox, please let us create our own Vault Hunters again in future titles. You guys absolutely nailed this. In terms of just aesthetics, there is so much variety. Now unfortunately you can't customize your body aside from picking body 1 or 2, but your face is fully customizable. It has sliders, it has presets, it has everything you would ever wish for in an RPG. Unfortunately though, this means that heads are not available in this game, but there still are customization options such as headgear and masks. Skins are handled by your armor, which are just this game's version of class mods, but you can customize patterns and colors in the new U station. Apart from aesthetics, you also get to choose from one of 6 classes. Unfortunately, I don't have much time in anything except for the Clawbringer and Stabomancer, but I can give you a quick rundown of each one. So Berserkers are tenacious, frost-infested bruisers who complement their firepower with an onslaught of brutal, up-close and personal melee attacks. Clawbringers are faithful warriors who bring down thunder and flames upon their enemies with a spectral hammer alongside their fire-breathing wyvern companion. Graveborn are death-touched acolytes who sacrifice health to unleash devastating dark magic attacks and become the phantasmal reaper of bones, accompanied by their manic demi-lich companion. Spell shots are gun-toting wizards who can unleash a constant barrage of spells and bullets to transform their enemies into harmless livestock with the snap of a finger. Spore wardens are masters of nature who summon tornadoes and launch volleys of arcane arrows into enemy lines alongside their toxin-spewing mushroom companion. And Stabomancers are sneaky, critical hit focused assassins who summon magic whirling blades to the battlefield and disappear into the shadows at will. On top of being able to fully customize your character and pick their class, you also have a stat card in which you can choose a few stats to make your character a little more fine-tuned to your playstyle and build. As for skill trees, they aren't as in-depth as the other games. This time there's only 1 tree per class, which is kind of underwhelming for a Borderlands game, but considering there's 6 different classes, it's kind of understandable. Thankfully, you can multi-class once you reach level 13, which allows you to unlock that class's action skill as well as their whole skill tree. The gameplay is super fluid. Like a lot of things from this game, it's basically just an asset flip from Borderlands 3, but that certainly isn't a bad thing. This is kind of a subjective topic, but I think Borderlands 3 absolutely nailed first-person shooter, combat, and movement. You can slide, jump, grapple, and you don't take any fall damage at all, so the game just keeps flowing as long as you do. Most guns you find will have a secondary fire mode, whether it be switching bursts from 2 shots to 4, or something more extreme like a shotgun on a sniper rifle. All the guns feel amazing to use, and the pace of the game as well as the balancing are absolutely perfect. I've never encountered a fight that felt unfair, but at the same time the game still feels challenging and rewarding. As a matter of fact, the game actually scales to your level. For reference, the gameplay footage you've been seeing is on the balanced difficulty. The story of the game is pretty whatever. It's a generic save the world from the evil overlord kind of thing, but we don't know who the evil guy really is on a personal level or what his motivations are. I'll admit though that he's actually pretty funny, and he's certainly a step up from the Calypso twins, but not on Handsome Jack level, of course. I will say that if you know a little bit about Tiny Tina's character, then there are some pretty deep moments that hit a soft spot. I didn't really expect anything groundbreaking anyway, seeing as this is a spin-off and not Borderlands 4, so the lighthearted, goofy fun adventure really isn't a deal breaker. The dialogue itself is really well voice acted and for the most part pretty funny with a hint of cringe here and there. There was a part in the story where I had to seduce a drawbridge to quote unquote get it to go down on me.
Hello there. Couldn't help but notice your reinforced beams from across the moat.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna make you roll for that. The drawbridge, it takes your flavor, baby.
Works every time.
The questlines are extremely well made, my personal favorite being the Beanstalk Town. I love that it never felt like a chore to depart from the main path for a little bit to experience the side content, and that is truly a blessing. The game took me around 16 hours to beat, with my main focus being on the story and occasionally doing a few side quests here and there. And there you have it, that's my review of Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. Overall, I'd give the game an 8 out of 10. It's another really fun spin-off title within the Borderlands series, and it's everything I was expecting from a Borderlands title. I do, however, wish they could have been a little bit more creative in certain aspects, but the looting and shooting stays true to the series, and I'm pretty excited to see what they have in store for us in the future. Anyway, goodbye.